But I do welcome those of you who have made it this morning. My name is Leanne Matthews, and I am the Digital Communications Coordinator for the Diocese of Montreal. And I'm excited to be launching this series of webinars to support you in your ministry. Many of us, of course, have been working furiously to adapt to the pandemic situation and really curating some brilliant digital worship. So today we'll be speaking about Zoom, and I will be your host. I have Madden Watts, who's going to be our sort of tech support and also be here to help navigate all of the questions as they're pouring into the chat throughout the course of this hour-and-a-half webinar. And we have Dr. Jonathan White, who is going to be our presenter today. So I welcome you, and I thank Jonathan and Madden, and yeah, that's who we are. A word of thanks to all of you for not only showing up this morning and not only having so much passion and desire to learn, because I do appreciate and understand how hard these times have been. So a word of thanks on all the work you've been doing, and yeah, thanks on that. Thanks to those of you, of course, who are, especially to Jonathan, who actually spearheaded this whole webinar concept this summer with me. He reached out to me and said, I've been learning and I want to share what I've been learning. So thank you, Jonathan, for volunteering to share your learnings with us. We'll be using webinar format, as I already said, which means you will not be, we'll ask you not to use the video or the audio function on your Zoom platform this morning. That will help the presenter to have the spotlight. So we'll just let his voice be the predominant voice. We'll be using the chat function for questions. We will be meeting this morning from 10 to 11:30, and we'll try to respect that as much as possible. If there are any questions that happen to not be responded to during the course of this webinar, Jonathan has kindly agreed to be able to respond to them via email following the webinar today. Our topic, of course, today is music and worship. There will be a series of 3 consecutive Fridays that we'll be gathering here on this platform to speak about 3 different topics. So in terms of any questions that you may have about the tech or about security or about ethics or about formation or about community, those will be in the following weeks. So today our focus is on music and worship, in particular on the Zoom platform. We're not going to be giving an overview of digital worship. We're not talking about social media. We are really speaking about Zoom. So let's just try to focus in as much as we can on the Zoom platform and on music and worship on the Zoom platform. And if it's okay with you, I would ask if we could just pray together before we begin. So let us pray. Living God, we know that we are called to share your good news, and we know that for many this time of pandemic has been one of fear and isolation. We thank you for the privilege of digital communications to allow us to connect with others, to share your word, to glorify you and build your kingdom here on earth. Now we ask for your blessing on this webinar and all who are gathered. May we be filled with a new understanding and desire to share your word, to love your people and know your mercy. Amen. So let's dive into the webinar. Jonathan, are you ready and willing?
As ready as I'll ever be, yes.
Madden, you're good to go? All right, where you're good. Thumbs up, perfect. Okay, so let's begin. For the purposes of this conversation, let's just create a working definition of music and worship. So what would you say for the purpose of this conversation? What is music and worship as it pertains to this webinar?
I mean, it's pretty broad, to be honest, and in many ways it does what it says on the tin already. I suppose I would probably qualify that the majority of what we'll be talking about today is more directly relevant to Anglican worship, but I imagine that most, if not all of us here, probably come from that background. But of course, so much of what we do today in worship does draw on multiple different traditions. So even if you are coming at this from a slightly different perspective, there should be stuff for you here. I mean, certainly one of the, I suppose, inspirations behind this concept of these webinars and everything was to deal with this issue head on and confront the fact that we are faced with a very unusual reality for churches, for worship, for liturgy. And it is obviously the life force of the church, really, and it is at the heart of all that we do. And so looking at music and worship is looking at what do we do in worship? Why perhaps have we done some of what we've done? And how do we adapt that to this new reality that we're in? I think it's probably fair to say that all of us didn't really think we were going to be having to do this for very long. I remember back in March when this began, many of us thought that by Easter or shortly afterwards, we'd probably be back to normal again, or at least back in church again. And so we haven't necessarily confronted this digital realm with the same enthusiasm and energy as we might in in-person worship. But of course, digital ministry and this kind of worship is nothing new. It's been going on for years, if not decades. But I think also thinking about what new spaces we're creating, how do we adapt to those new spaces? Anglicanism is a liturgical tradition, and that doesn't mean we have no freedom and no sort of lateral movement in terms of what we do, but at the same time, so much of our worship is codified by historic practice, by convention, and by familiarity of worship. But so much of that has actually been formed for the spaces in which we worship. So whilst churches differ in their architecture, in their style, in their size, and in their layout, so much of the spaces that we have been using for worship have themselves played into the ways in which we worship as well, because those spaces are a sort of physical manifestation of our worship values, of our theology as well. And of course, Zoom, or indeed any platform that you might be using, hasn't been built that way. It just comes as a sort of, I don't want to say it's like a piece of IKEA furniture, but it kind of is a flat pack version of a space that's designed for multiple different uses. And so our liturgies don't necessarily make sense anymore in this space. They still can work, they still enrich people. And I think it's testament to the huge amount of energy, enthusiasm, and dedication that has been shown by clergy, by parishioners, by the laity, not only in our own diocese, but around the world, that we have managed to keep a vibrant worship life going through all of this. Certainly, I know at the cathedral, but I'm sure this is the case for many, many other churches, that people do come away from our online services saying they feel like they've been to church. And I do think that we should take pride in the fact that so many people have been able to continue this, that we've adapted quickly, and that we've been able to see all the good in this too. Because obviously it has been going on for a while now. We are slowly moving through a phase where we can return to worship, but it's quite possible that that might only be temporary. And of course, for many people, they don't yet have the ability to go back to worship. So I want us to think and encourage people to sort of embrace this new realm, not to see it as being a second best or a poor shadow of what we used to have. And of course, it isn't the same, but that doesn't mean we still can't make it as enriching for people.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, and certainly the work that you've been doing at the cathedral throughout this pandemic has been testimony to that. And not only at the cathedral, but I know you've been really just innovating music on digitally throughout this past 6 months. So yeah, you've been pioneering. I mean, I know we've all been pioneers. You've certainly been pioneering this new way of doing worship. So let's talk a little bit about your learnings. I mean, can you share with us some of your struggles, some of your triumphs, some of the highs and lows?
Sure. I mean, perhaps one other qualifier I would say is that much of what I will be saying today is from my experience working at the cathedral, but obviously we are a large-scale operation. We have resources that many other churches don't have. And so I don't want anybody, I hope, to come away from this thinking like, I've just told you how we do it when we have all of that. I hope that from all of this, it'll be a question of highlighting issues that we faced and how we've perhaps addressed them, but that we all face the same issues. And if any of this doesn't make sense, then obviously do feel free to ask questions as we go along or for clarification. I mean, one of the big challenges that we have faced at the cathedral, and I think many other people have, is that both liturgy and music have always relied on physical presence. Of course, we come from a very, very long tradition of understanding that when we pray, whether we are on our own or physically surrounded by people, we always pray with others anyway. That is of itself nothing new, and has probably been around, not quite for the entire history of Christianity, but certainly for many, many centuries, this concept that you never actually pray alone. And so even though physically we might not be together when we celebrate worship now, we do still unite together when we do that. But of course, our liturgies have been built around that notion of physical presence. The Eucharist is a classic example of one of the big challenges that we faced throughout this situation. But music making as well requires physical presence. The act of making music is an organic act. It is a responsive act, and rehearsals and performances, whether in a sacred or a secular context, always rely on this aspect of communication and ready communication between those taking part. And indeed those who are observers and listeners. It's very easy to think that if you're not the one performing, in inverted commas, you are somehow passive in all of this. But certainly my experience of working in liturgical music specifically, but even in a non-sacred context, is that music making is a process that engages everybody that encounters it. And of course, if we are now encountering it in an online medium, and maybe not even in a live medium, it has changed the way that that message is sent out and how it is then received. And of course, another thing that we've had to deal with is that music making often involves numerous people in not in different places, but numerous people all contributing to one whole. And the physical distance hasn't made that possible anymore. One of the problems that I'm sure everybody has noticed with Zoom and indeed any online interface is that the latency, the unpredictability of internet speeds and all sorts of other things mean that making music is very difficult when you can't actually even line up together. And so we've had challenges with that. Challenges also with figuring out how to make music available and how best to transmit that, because of course we, like pretty much every church, don't have our own library of pre-recorded music that we can just use. Whilst there is a huge amount of music readily available online and in other places, obviously copyright laws do actually prevent us from using a lot of this. A lot of people don't understand that just because something is on YouTube and that you can watch it at home, that doesn't mean you're actually allowed to use it, say, in an online service. Because if you actually look through the YouTube guidelines, for example, the user terms actually make it quite clear that it is only for personal use. And so that doesn't mean you can't approach the person that's created that content and say, can I use it in a service? But there is no automatic right just to use it because you see it there. It's like back when we used to all watch videotapes, and technically speaking, you were only licensed to watch them at home and you couldn't play them in a school or in a bar or something like that because you hadn't bought it for that purpose. And I think it's important to remember that all the laws and everything else that govern our real life also apply when we're online. And I don't think that churches are all of a sudden going to become a target for copyright enforcers. But at the same time, we do have to remember that if we're broadcasting something, all of a sudden it's a lot more easy for people to find. So we've had to deal with that too. We've ourselves produced a lot of in-house music using the facilities that we either have available or that we've since acquired. And that has, of course, required a huge amount of work. I mean, one of the things that I've had to deal with is that a hymn that I would normally probably only have to spend a minute or two practicing before a service, I now might spend anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour or two producing for an online service. And of course, that kind of work level is fine if you've got a department like ours, but it's not very easy if you're in a small church where your director of music might only be employed part-time, might even be a volunteer. And so it's like, those are the other sorts of issues that I think a lot of churches have found. However, when we were setting this webinar series up, I've been very heartened by the number of emails we've had from people saying, we've managed to keep this going somehow, whether it's just through some dedicated volunteer who's playing the piano at home, or whether a group of churches have all come together and taken turns and things like that. And so I think one of the things that we've really learned as well in this is the need for cooperation. It's not that churches don't get along with one another, but we've never really, I think, as a unit, a sort of, I suppose, a community of different communities, necessarily seen the need to collaborate on our day-to-day work and the fundamentals of what we do. But I think that this is obviously helping us to encourage that. I see there's a question about each other's recorded material. In theory, yes, you'd have to effectively get permission from whoever's doing it. The way, I don't want to go too much into the ins and outs of copyright law, but assuming that whatever you're recording isn't governed by any other copyrights, the copyright ownership vests in whoever's created it, and therefore it is their right, I suppose, to grant usage of that to somebody else. And yes, certainly what we're producing at the cathedral is available for others to use. That was something was going to deal with, but I might, whilst that question's come up, I want to just share this quickly. I'm going to share my screen with you. Some of you may have come across this already. At the cathedral over the last few months, we've been building an online library of different musical resources. Much of what you'll see on this page is just a collection of other bits and pieces to support perhaps more personal devotion, personal music making. Some of you may have seen Nick Capozzoli's really good series about the history of hymn singing. There's, I think, 14 episodes now. And they all end with a hymn that you can sing at home. We also have a series on psalm singing, choir pieces, some educational materials. We've also got a thing about parish music support. We've been creating hymns, psalms, etc., for use in our own morning worship that have been very useful for our congregation. And certainly I'm more than happy for other parishes to take use of those resources. Probably the best thing is to contact me directly, and I can let you know what we currently have available. The other thing that I would probably say to people, you probably know this already, is if you're going to be broadcasting music, you also need to have a license to do that. They're pretty inexpensive. I'll just share my screen again. We have two at the cathedral. If I can just navigate this. One is provided by CCLI, and then the other one is provided by One License. I imagine that most people here are probably using Common Praise. Obviously, a lot of material in the hymn book is out of copyright already, and so that isn't an issue for people. But a large number of hymns are still in copyright. Copyright laws in Canada, I believe, are 50 years after the death of the creator, unless they've been renewed or anything like that. You can, in the hymnal, it has all the details about copyright. And obviously bear in mind the hymnal is now a few years old, and so some of the items that are listed as being copyright might not be anymore. But some of the words have occasionally been changed and things like that. These licenses won't cover absolutely everything under the sun, but they do cover quite a lot. And they're fairly inexpensive. I can't remember exactly how much we pay, but we're talking tens of dollars. It's nothing huge. And they, I think, would be a very useful resource for any church at the moment who's thinking about how they might be using music at the moment, and particularly as we move forwards.
So I just wanted to to remind you that I know that there's a lot of dense information that's coming at you, and a lot of so definitely feel free to write any questions you might have in the chat. So we can maybe unpack things more as they've come out. Because I know that I've heard a lot of things, and I was like, oh, what is that? What is that? So maybe we can go into that more if you need to. I mean, I can just say that even in my experience, you know, in the ministry that I do with Supper Club, we have had, obviously music is an important part of that ministry, and we've really had to modify it, as we all know. And one of the things that really was challenging is that, you know, just group singing, which seems like a no-brainer, just so everybody can sing together, is just not possible on Zoom. I don't know if you had already planned on speaking more about that, but can you talk about, and if you do, just say I'm getting to it later. But if not, I was just curious if you could talk a little bit, about like how is group singing possible on Zoom, like with everybody unmuted, or is that just not possible anymore?
Sure. Just before I come, I noticed there's a question about some of the licenses. So one thing to bear in mind is that with CCLI and One license, they also cover licenses for reproducing materials in bulletins, for example. So I can't speak exactly to some of those. I mean, we've had those licenses for quite some time. And when I say the amounts, it's the amount that you need to add on the ability to stream music as well. Again, if you have been reproducing music in your bulletins, then in theory you should have these licenses anyway. But of course, many people haven't needed to do that because they've used hymnals. I mean, another approach that you can do is just be a little bit more selective in the music that you choose, and just ensure that it is out of copyright. Obviously, a huge number of the hymns that we do write, a huge number of the hymns that we do use are out of copyright anyway. So just check with the hymnals and have a look. But I mean, I'm not an expert, but if anybody wants to follow this up in a bit more depth, I'm more than happy having a chat with you about that. Yeah, the materials that we have produced used to be online, but they were obviously filling up a lot of online usage space. So they're not permanently stored at the moment, but if you wish to get hold of them, then just get in touch with me and I'll let you know we can figure out the best way of getting them to you based on whatever resources you're currently using and everything. So sorry, back to your question about singing. Yes, one of the issues that we obviously find with Zoom is that there is some latency. Singing together, I mean, even talking together can be quite challenging at times. You'll notice probably even if you try reciting the Lord's Prayer all together with a group of 5 or 6 people, by the time you get to the end, you've sort of finished and others are still only halfway there. I'm not really aware of many programs that have found a way of dealing with this effectively. I have been told of some software that is now available that makes it a lot better. And I think it's probably worth bearing in mind that a lot of people obviously have been encountering the same issues that we have here. There is a lot of development and research going on, looking at ways in which we can make some of these things more easy. Now, of course, none of us knows yet when that kind of technology will be available, and if and when it is, just how expensive it is. Obviously, one of the issues that we face as churches, as opposed to, say, large private universities or big educational authorities that might be able to justify spending huge amounts of money on this kind of thing, is we don't yet know if it's going to be the sort of resource that most people could reasonably expect to be able to afford. But there are obviously a number of other ways in which you can engage your singers. We, like so many other choirs, have engaged in a series of what are called virtual choir projects. I'm not sure if it's the best descriptor, because I know a lot of people have some issue, and I think rightly so, with the word virtual, because it implies that it's not real. And actually the fact is that everything we do online is still real. It's not make-believe. It is still real music making, even if it's a very unusual form of music making. These are very time-consuming projects. It does require some degree of technical know-how, and there is software available. But having said that, depending on the setup that you're in, depending on the number of people you've got, there are a lot of other options available to you. So things like there's an app called Acapella. I think it's available on numerous different, because some of the problem with some of these things are only available, say, on Apple devices or Android devices. And so this is another issue that some people find, is that, of course, not everybody uses the same thing. But something like Acapella, for example, allows you to have 9 people record their things together, and then it all sticks itself together. There are a lot of virtual choir apps either now available or being developed that enable you to send things out, receive things back. There are other services, professional services, offering a facility for putting together projects for you. Some of them are quite costly again, so it might be that these aren't achievable for some small groups. But the other thing I'd say is that there are actually a large number of organizations offering different things. I was, I'll show you something else now. I was only chatting earlier with, there's an organization, many of you might know of it, the RSCM, the Royal School of Church Music. They're not hugely active in Canada, but they do have a presence. And there is, for example, an online choirs festival happening. It's being promoted by the St. Albans area. And if you wish to take part in a virtual evensong, you can do so. They're asking for a small donation, and you can submit what you want in terms of the quantity of music. And there are huge numbers of other projects like this as well going on at the moment. So, I mean, one of the big advantages right now is that the borders really don't mean anything anymore when it comes to this sort of stuff. There is an opportunity and ability here for us to make music with people that we would never otherwise have come into contact with, and may never well meet either. I think the one thing I would say to you is, if you haven't yet had a go at this, or you haven't been involved in this sort of project, just bear in mind that it's a very unusual experience for everybody involved. As I said earlier, one of the big things about making music is that it's normally a shared activity with physical presence. And when you're sat at home with your smartphone in front of you, a pair of headphones on, and you're singing along to a backing track, kind of like karaoke style, it is very strange. And of course, I find it, lots of other people find it, the second you press the record button, you will start making mistakes that you never normally make. And that's why something that normally you do perfectly in live performance, you end up having to do 7 or 8 times before getting it right. And so I would think, if you are thinking of doing this with your group, just bear in mind that your singers will need some degree of encouragement and support through this. And I think they will enjoy it. They will see I suppose the joys of doing something like this, even though it is unusual. But encouraging people, reassuring them that they still sound good, because again, even the world's best trained singer, if you hear them singing all by themselves one part in isolation, it's going to sound unusual. And lots of people in the choir, when they've sent their videos in, say to me, this sounds terrible, I sound awful. And then you put it all together and they think, oh, I'm not really sure what I was talking about there.
I just wanted to check in with Madden, because I know Madden had been asking people to send him questions. Madden, how are you doing? Do you have any questions that that have popped up for John?
No, everything Jonathan's covered so far. I think Gordon Johnson had just mentioned that there is a webinar Saturday morning, how to create a collaborative choir video, at rcco-ottawa.ca. So I guess you guys can check that out as well. Someone was saying that Acapella is only available on Apple products as well. Okay. And that, but I have found that there are different video collage apps on Android. They are just a little bit more finicky and having to get used to them. So
yeah. I mean, it might be worth I mean, thank you for drawing our attention to the RCCO workshop. It's probably worth mentioning there are a large number of both national and international organizations out there, all of whom support church music and liturgical music. The RCCO, many of you may be familiar with, the Royal Canadian College of Organists, is very active, both on a more regional level and a national level. I also mentioned the Royal School of Church Music. They are, I mean, they're based here in the UK, but they do have a presence in Canada. You can see their website here, www.rscm.org.uk. There is a national committee, I believe, in Canada, and some more regional committees as well. I think the Montreal area gets grouped together with Ontario and a few other places, so it's a rather large geographical spread. But of course, all of these organizations are themselves trying to think about how do we deal with this situation? What resources can we make available to people? A lot of them have themselves been doing webinars, providing support and networks to people who are trying to find others to help them do what they're trying to do at the moment. And certainly that's what I'm keen for us to be doing here with the Cathedral program, is that obviously our primary purpose is to support the liturgy at the Cathedral, but we are also the diocesan mother church, and I do feel that we have a responsibility to our parishes and to our parish music life. Now, obviously, I don't want to overshadow what many parishes have been doing themselves. I don't want musicians to suddenly find themselves out of a job because churches think that they don't need them anymore. But we are here to help too. And I want the gifts and the resources that we have to be gifts that others can share and take advantage of. And we are looking ourselves at what outreach we might also be able to do. I don't want to make any promises at the moment because we have to think about what we can manage with the team and the workload. But we do certainly want to be something of either a focal point or at least a conduit through which different conversations can happen. And I think, again, one of the stimuli behind this whole webinar series is just encouraging people to talk with one another, to remember that dialogue is there to help us all, and that the advantage of this situation is that we aren't restricted in the ways that we used to in terms of geography and anything else. And
which is why we're all here today, which is great. Michael said that the hymns that had been recorded were very helpful for a while, but now seem to have disappeared from the website, even those in the public domain. I think you addressed that already, Jonathan, didn't you?
Yes, so it's just a question of using up our online storage, but I mean, I still have all the resources available, and certainly if you want to access them, just get in touch with me and I can let you know what we currently have available, what's on the schedule to be produced, and it's just a question of figuring out the best way of transmitting the files, because we found a way of making them a lot smaller than they used to be. When we started this, one hymn was over 1 gigabyte in size, and now we've managed to get it down to a much more manageable size, but they're still not the sort of things that I can just email around. So yeah, it's nothing to do with any rights or anything. It's just simply a question of where they're being stored.
So are those hymns, like could anybody use those in their worship service? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, well, we're certainly happy making these available to people. That would obviously be the only thing to bear in mind is that some of what we've produced probably is in copyright, and we can use it in the Cathedral because we have the right licenses. But again, that's something that I could probably address more directly with anybody wanting to use a specific thing, as to whether or not I think you might need to just look at that.
For example, a couple of, for the ordinations this summer, the online ordinations, your music was,
yeah,
that's an example of the kind of talk about, right?
Yeah, and obviously we have, I mean, if you want it, we have organ music as well. We have there's a huge variety of different things that we have available that parishes can use if they want to. As I say, just let me know. We can have a go. I mean, certainly a few priests have already been in touch with me about what we've got available so far. Some have even been inquiring about Christmas and what may or may not be available in that respect. Obviously, I know we don't want to think about it yet, but it is only a few months away now. And certainly we want to do all that we can to support you. So yes, please do get in touch and I'll let you know what we've got, and we can go from there.
I have to say they're really great videos that you prepared, because the hymn lyrics are up on the screen, so you don't have to open a book or go to a different site to get the lyrics to sing along. So I enjoyed that a lot. Kenny says that he uses Movavi, M-O-V-A-V-I. So that's another, I guess, one of these resources that one could acquire. And Gwenda talks about Choral Canada as another resource.
Yeah. I mean, certainly one of the other things that we've obviously encountered, and I'm sure many people here will be encountering, is If you're using Zoom for your worship, the people that you have attending are probably accessing in a number of different ways from a number of different devices, and their familiarity with these devices is obviously going to be hugely variable. We have a large number of people who phone in, for example, because they don't have computers or for whatever other reason. And certainly one of the challenges that I still don't think we've yet solved is how do we ensure that people in that situation can still take part? Because of course, we aren't currently posting out bulletins, for example, and many people don't have hymn books at home. So certainly another resource I'd just like to flag, if again, many people might know about this, but there is a website called Hymnary.org. It's a huge online catalog of hymns and hymnals. Am I signed in on? Oh, I'm not actually signed in. But you can, so Common Praise, for example, is on this site. A number of other hymnals are too. If we were to, let's just find Common Praise. See if we can find it. So here you are, for example, and it doesn't have every single hymn. You'll notice that if you're looking down here, some show they've just got the text available, others will show you a page scan of the hymn. This will all be depending on whether or not something is or isn't in copyright and various other bits and pieces. But it's possible that you could be directing members of your churches towards things like this as well, if they don't have access to a hymnal and they might be struggling in other ways. Of course, that still does assume that they have a computer or other bits and pieces, and this is obviously one of the big issues facing us. I don't believe you have to pay for him. I think with Hymnary, you can make a voluntary donation if you like. I certainly don't have a paid for account and I use it quite regularly. I don't know if there are other functions and facilities that become available if you do pay for it. But it is obviously going to be a challenge thinking about how do members access some of these things. In respect for words from Common Praise, I believe, again, so long as the words aren't in copyright, you should be fine. If they are and you have one of the licenses we referred to earlier on, you should probably also be fine. But it might be worth checking. I don't know if there's someone either in the diocese or maybe more at the Anglican Church nationally, because obviously Common Praise is actually owned by the Anglican Church in Canada. So it may well be that somebody at the national level can advise you what the ins and outs of using it are. So I just double check with them.
Great. I think it was really cruel when you did your screen share, brought that up, and we didn't get a chance to sing along. Don't show me a hymn if we're not going to sing it, Jonathan. Okay. Let's talk about the criteria for effective music ministry in a Zoom church service. So I was hoping you'd be able to maybe provide us with a checklist of sorts for leaders to help them to improve or create effective music and worship on Zoom. So according to you, what would you say is a checklist for the criteria for effective music ministry for church leaders?
Well, I think what I would probably say is that church leaders know their congregations much better than I ever would. Certainly the way we've gone about it at the cathedral is trying to figure out what we think matters to our congregation, what they value from music, and how best to deal with that. And I would say to anybody thinking about how do you integrate music into Zoom worship, to actually think about your own congregations, because as I say, you know them, you know what they're used to. And I think that's the really important thing. You also know, I think, what matters to them, and maybe if you feel you don't, you're the ones that are in a much better place to find that out from people. The other thing I'd probably just say is that it's very easy for us to forget that even in real worship, even in in-person worship, people don't necessarily join in the ways we think they are. I mean, when we're doing hymns at the cathedral, for example, I often do have a quick scroll through to see who is and isn't taking part, not for individual purposes, but it's just, I find it useful to see how many people in general are participating. And quite a few of ours are, because again, we have a congregation that does sing quite well. But I wouldn't get disheartened if you are looking through and you don't see people engaging. That might mean, though, that you want to think about how you're using music, and if the music you're using is either what your congregation needs right now, or maybe if there's another way of injecting creativity into a service. Because, of course, music is a huge part of Anglican worship, but it's not the only way that we can be creative. It's not the only way that we can express beauty and creativity in our worship. And some congregations might actually probably find using poetry or visual art or any other number of different forms of creativity to express those things. And again, I think that one of the, I mean, this is a more broader liturgical thing, but one of the great things about this situation is that we can think outside the box a lot more and do things that maybe we never would have done in person because our buildings didn't make it possible, or whatever else it might be. And so I wouldn't say you have to use music all the time in this way. But that doesn't mean that music still can't be used very effectively. I mean, we've certainly found it very useful having a prelude, for example, because I'm sure everybody here has realized that the transitional spaces and moments that we have in physical life don't exist on Zoom. It doesn't provide for that. And I say that isn't just in church. If you think about a shopping mall or a concert hall, every building has been designed to kind of not strip away the outside world as you enter, but to condition you to a new physical space. And you don't get that on Zoom. And so we've certainly found the use of, say, a prelude is a good way of enabling and encouraging people to center themselves a bit more. But that could be in any other number of ways too. We've generally found that it's not that being really concise is the best way forward, but that 5, 6, 7, 8 verse hymns probably aren't going to work so great on a Zoom interface, but anything between 2 and 4 is going to be good. But again, I think a lot of us, particularly on the leadership side, feel a real sense of anxiety about timing, and even silence on Zoom can be a real problem. But I think silence is still an important part of worship. And again, these are things that we need to think about incorporating into what we're doing online as well. But again, it's about what works for your congregation, what they're used to, and what their familiarity is. I think this is a great opportunity to engage more with people and to ask them what they really value and what matters to them.
Matt, do you have any questions around that, or is everything okay on your end?
Things are okay. People are mentioning that if you paid for the Hymnary account, access to Flex scores, for public domain music is available if you pay for it. Someone also mentioned that some hymn texts not available under Common Praise are there under Voices United. That's another resource someone was messaging about. But they also stated that otherwise you probably get stuck with less inclusive, theologically more conservative American hymnals. So someone actually just asked, so hymnary might be better than CLI. What's HymFlex? If that needs to be addressed.
There's a question here about Zoom versus Facebook. I mean, it's a good question. One thing I'd probably say is that for all these webinars, we are focusing primarily on Zoom. I suppose the difference with Facebook might be that you might be using a less interactive form. But that a lot of churches have successfully used more of a live streaming format. For example, here in Montreal, A&P have been doing that since the beginning of the pandemic. Plenty of other churches are too. I think, again, it depends on what works best for your congregation. At the cathedral, we decided that we preferred Zoom because it allowed us to interact more with people. That's not a quality thing or it's something about it being better than Facebook, because I think for some churches, in fact, the ability to pre-record a service and make it available is actually probably better for them. It might also meet the needs of their parishes more. And of course, we've been living in a world for many years now where Sunday worship as an entrenched thing has become less and less relevant's probably not the right word, but many churches have been looking at how to get around that issue, whether it's having midweek services or whatever else it might be, because of course we no longer have a world where weekends are enshrined and where it can be a given that families are always together and that sort of thing. Yes, someone's pointed out that you can stream Zoom out to Facebook. You can stream it out to YouTube as well. In theory, you can do it to both, but I think you need an intermediary service to do that. I don't believe you can do both at the same time directly from Zoom. But obviously, there are lots of other software packages available, lots of other ways in which you can make materials available. And certainly that's what, for those of you who might visit the music page that I mentioned on the Cathedral website, you'll find a lot of stuff that we've been making specifically for people to use when they need it and when they want it. Because I do think that, again, there is a need and or an opportunity here for churches to provide people with resources and inspiration for private devotion at home that maybe before they didn't need to do or they were unable to do. Now, of course, we all know all of this takes so much more time than preparing for an in-person service. And so I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. It's important not to bite off more than you can chew in that sense. And obviously, however understanding your parishioners might be, if you say to them, I'm going to do this now, and then all of a sudden you find 2 weeks in that you can't manage it anymore, there will be a degree of disappointment. But that's again where I think sharing resources can be quite helpful and quite useful. I mean, early on in the lockdown, we actually did a joint Compline service with an Episcopal church in Connecticut. And that was quite a fun project. I think it had a natural shelf life. But it was nice being able to do that. We used Zoom again for that, and we had it broadcast out on Facebook and YouTube. And that could be another thing that you could look at. Of course, lots of places are offering their own services, whether it's the daily office or other bits and pieces. I'm in Diocesan College, where I also work. They have a daily office schedule. It's not the same as it used to be in terms of regularity, but it is happening. Lots of churches are offering morning prayer, evening prayer, Compline, and maybe the solution is to group together and have a rota of stuff. And things like Plainsong and that do actually work reasonably well on Zoom, especially if you have maybe an officiant and a respondent, for example, where you don't have to worry too much about the time delay side of things. And sometimes those things are more accessible. People feel less intimidated about doing something simple like that. And you may find that people will come forward to take a leadership role or at least assist in that kind of thing that might otherwise not have been willing to do so.
That's very helpful. Thank you in particular for reminding us of the importance of experimentation, creativity, and even a little playfulness, perhaps, because I think that this new way of doing ministry certainly has forced us to try something new, and which is, I think, a healthy thing. Gregory Mercer says that some churches are using church online platform designed by churches for churches. It's called the Church Online Platform. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, but I certainly know that there are, as I say, much more specific facilities there. I know there's a lot of technology that's been designed or is being designed to assist churches, say, who might be looking at live streaming as part of their digital offering now, because certainly whilst we're in a period where in-person worship is possible, that might be a solution for some churches. And even if we find ourselves back in a situation where we're either having to restrict in-person worship or perhaps having to roll it back altogether, that might still enable people the opportunity of live streaming services from their churches still. I mean, certainly one of the things, and this isn't a musical thing, but very early on in the lockdown, we instituted a daily prayer rota at the cathedral from the cathedral itself. And it was meeting a need that we recognized within our congregation to have some sense of physical connection with the building. Obviously, things have changed now. The building is open anyway, but people have adjusted now, a little bit more at least. But certainly, again, all of these solutions are about identifying what your members need and how you think you can address that need. And for us, that was one way of doing it, allowing people to see inside the building once a day. And especially given that their access to it was literally removed without any warning. Nobody even had a moment to sort of process what was going on before it happened. And I don't think we're going to find ourselves with that sort of very sudden shift again. But it is going to be an issue, I think, particularly as we head towards the winter and through that period. There is going to be a need in different communities to figure out how they're going to meet the spiritual, pastoral, and worship needs of their members. And I think, again, that's where collaboration is going to be really helpful, pooling resources and being creative. I mean, we've spoken a lot about music, and obviously I'm not a priest. I don't physically create liturgy, but I do play a big role in the liturgy that we do. And I'm sure many people here or their churches have been experimenting with the format of services, for example. Do you follow a morning prayer format? Do you follow a sort of anti-communion? Do you do something else? And what are the sort of restrictions on that sort of thing? And again, many, if not all priests will know already how to think about those sorts of things, but I would certainly encourage people to think creatively. Even in our prayer rota, we incorporated poems a lot. We would speak hymns, because obviously many hymns are themselves poems anyway, whether it or reintroducing canticles that may not be used very often, stuff like that. And it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it's certainly before my time, and probably maybe before most people's time here, that morning prayer was actually the staple of Anglican worship. And we actually have quite a large number of people in the cathedral who would like to see a return of things like that. That's not to say that we lose the Eucharist and we use its central importance in what we're doing. But again, we are in a situation where we can be a little bit more creative. And obviously, you need to ensure that your bishop is happy with any more experimental liturgies that you might do. But another resource that might be helpful for some people, again, many people here might know about this already, is there's a website here called justus.anglican.org. Well, and it actually has a very large resource collection of prayer books, of liturgies from Anglican churches from all around the world, some of which are currently in use and some of which are historic. And there is an opportunity here for us to draw on that rich history of worship tradition. I mean, Anglicanism itself was an adaptation of pre-existing liturgies that were reshaped to match what was perceived as a changing need. And of course, here we are again in a situation where our needs are changing, and our ability to adapt is going to be really important. And I think also our ability to be the facilitators of change rather than the begrudging, just begrudgingly saying, okay, we've got to do this now, we don't have much choice. So I think this is a real opportunity for us to step forward as leaders and say, let's do something different now. Let's see what we can do, because we know from the figures that dozens and hundreds of adults around the world have been tuning into churches online who never would have done before. I believe it's in some countries 25% or more, and obviously depending on where you are geographically, that might either be a huge number or an insignificant number. But our churches are being given a platform now to reach out to people who never normally thought that we were relevant. And I think this is a great opportunity for the church to reaffirm its relevance in society, to reaffirm that it has a place, that it can provide the encouragement, the nourishment, and the care that people need. And it's not just our own members. And that doesn't mean we change because new people are coming. But I think we should be aware of the fact that more are turning towards us and asking why that is and what we can give them.
Yeah, that's really, really encouraging. And my last question for you, before we turn to more questions and from those who are gathered, is actually to ask for some advice and encouragement. Although I think you've been providing advice and encouragement so far already. But if you could just specifically give us some advice and some encouragement for church leaders. Everybody's been working so hard to adapt to digital worship. What would you say? What would you say to us?
I'd say what you've been doing is enormously appreciated. I know I've heard it from many people. I'm sure you've heard it from many people. But it is making a huge difference to people in ways that we never thought imaginable. I think we are providing the care that the church has always been associated with for centuries. And it is our ability to adapt in this way that shows that there is a real sense of charity and love at the heart of everything that we do. Because we all do this. Obviously, we do this because of what our faith teaches us, but we do this because we value community. And I think, again, one of the real achievements of this period so far for so many churches is their ability to keep that community together. And it is going to become more challenging as some people will find themselves able to go about life more normally and others won't. That we need to be there as that constant source of stability for people, irrespective of their situations. And certainly that's what we've been trying to do with our music, is making it a stable resource, a stable presence for people, because they always were used to it. And I do think we are all going to have to find a way of embracing whatever new normal or adapted normal or whatever it is that we're going to be faced with whenever we are. But I don't think that means that we've somehow abandoned everything that matters to us. We haven't lost sight of what is important. And we don't need to either. And so I think it's being able to provide that stable presence, that stable reassurance that helps people adjust to that thing. And obviously we aren't the only agents of change in the world. We aren't the only ones on whom this responsibility falls. But at the same time, we have been here for centuries helping people through crises. And I think it is great that so many continue to turn to us as their first port of call in that crisis. And I think it's great that so many of our congregations have stuck with us through thick and thin, because we know we've all made mistakes. We've all done something that we knew we could have done better, or whatever it might be that has disrupted our forms of worship online. But I think that has really made a big difference to people. And I would encourage people, no matter how tired you're feeling, how disenfranchised you're feeling, perhaps even how disconnected you're feeling, because that's the other thing, is that I don't think it's been an issue with the church in Canada, but certainly other churches. I mean, my own Church of England went through a period where it spent most of its time just fighting in public, bishops and priests disagreeing over what they should be doing. And I think they lost sight of what really mattered at that point. And as I say, I don't think that's something that we've fallen victim to in Canada. But it is something that we need to be aware of. And so I would just say thank you to everybody for what you've been doing, and to seek comfort from one another. Because I think the other thing to bear in mind is that worship leaders are often the ones who are there to provide the support and the comfort, but they need it too. And so sometimes you need to comfort one another. It's also okay to say you don't know. None of us saw this situation coming. None of us has been trained to deal with all of this. And it's okay to say, I don't know how to deal with this. So I would, I hope that helps anyway. But
well, it certainly does. So it seems like I do have some more questions for you, and I will be asking them to you, but I don't want to be the only one who has the opportunity to ask questions. So definitely, if you do have questions, Madam, does anybody have any questions that need to be presented right now?
Nope, not at the moment. There's just a thank you from Rosalind for bringing us together.
I wonder if maybe we could invite people to sort of appear again, because maybe that I've obviously said a lot to people, and we are still a gathered community here, and in the spirit of conversation and everything, I wonder if maybe a slightly more organic question session might work for people. I don't know. I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, but
Sure. So if you feel inclined, Jonathan is inviting you to be seen and heard. You may unmute your microphone and show us your video. Obviously, one at a time, so there's not too much noise. I will read a comment from Brian, who says, "We're just reopening this Sunday. We'll be doing communion water only in October, and my music director has suggested continuing to play the Gloria and Sanctus so that people can still hear those tunes, even though they can't sing, they can hum." He also says, "Thank you for hosting this. It was really informative and encouraging. Unfortunately, with the time zone, it got messed up and he has another appointment. Blessings, everyone." A number of people have had to hop off at 11, and that's fine too. So there are a smaller group, which does allow for, so I'm going to turn it back to gallery view so I can see more of you at the same time. And I will be asking another question to Jonathan, but if you do feel the need to, we would love to hear your questions. And also, I'll be asking a question to the group too. But so Jonathan, what would you say to someone who, I mean, I know this, I think what I'm hearing from you as you encourage people and remind us and thank people, that I know it doesn't take, like, you don't have to be too fancy on here. What would you say to somebody who is just like, they have an internet connection, they don't have a lot of experience with technology, they have a Zoom account, and they would like to start broadcasting for the first time? What would you say they should focus on, just as a way of like preliminary worship service? What would you say would be the most important things? Would it be, yeah, I'll let you answer.
I mean, again, I suspect that is more specific to different congregations or to who the service is being offered, because you might decide that you want to do a very simple service of the word, which doesn't require you to share a screen for people to have some kind of order at home or that kind of thing. So that could be one thing that you might do. Again, you might be in a congregation where you feel that lots of your members have prayer books at home, for example, or access to that kind of thing. And that could be another way of doing it. Because, I mean, certainly, I'm sure we've all found with Zoom, if you're leading worship, if you're sharing a screen, the interface all suddenly changes and it's easy to get lost. And I mean, even I've ended up closing files that I needed because there's a button in the way and all sorts of other bits and pieces. So I definitely spend time playing around with things. I mean, I often... even now, I still will set up like a meeting with myself, and I'll then broadcast it to my phone just so I see what it looks like coming at maybe the other end, and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it's just being familiar with the tools that you're using. I don't like using the sort of term idiot proof, because that kind of implies that if you're finding difficulty, I'm making a judgment about something. They are generally quite straightforward, but that really depends on everything is only easy when you know how to do it. Until that point, everything is fundamentally difficult. And so I think that it's just understanding that. You probably got someone in your congregation that knows a bit about this stuff too. That's the other thing, is don't be afraid to ask people for a little bit of help and advice. It's not going to undermine the respect that people have for you if you admit that you need some help with this. And I think, again, moving forwards, I suspect churches might rely on volunteers a bit more than they normally have done for some of these things, because again, even at the cathedral, we don't really have the staff to be manning online services for us in that way. It does require us to do it ourselves and to find willing assistants who are able to do it too. And so that is going to be a big part, I think, of worship life as we move forwards through the next few months.
I'm making space for others, but if you don't say anything, then I'll just have to keep going. All right, I'm curious, Jonathan, because I've sort of been watching what you've been up to for these past 6 months in different contexts, and really, to be honest, very impressed with the way that you have been doing your music ministry. And I'd love to know if you could share what has been the highlight for you in terms of how you've been a worship leader during this time.
Oh gosh, that's a question. I think the highlight is seeing how things that I might consider to be relatively insignificant, whether it's just producing a hymn or an organ piece or something, have actually really made a difference to people. And I think even in in-person worship, it's easy to underestimate the impact what you're doing has on people anyway. But I've certainly found that enriching and encouraging. I mean, the choir projects have been enormously time consuming, but again, they have been very rewarding to see. And I know that they have made a huge difference to people. It's amazing how one thing can really, I think, make a difference to somebody at home. And obviously, we don't exist in communities where everything we do is simply for the benefit of one individual. But I think we should remember that everything we're doing right now is making a big difference for someone somewhere, even if you don't know about it.
It's a helpful reminder. And yeah, I know you've been working really, really, really hard. Yeah. Michael wants to know, to go back to an earlier question, what is a flex score?
So someone else feel free to jump in and give more. My understanding is, let me see if I can find an example for you, is that it was in respect to the Hymnary website, that if you go to a particular hymn, see if I can find an example. I'm going to struggle to find one in time for this to be meaningful. My understanding is
I can pop in for you. Hi. Flex score, like suppose you have like a hymn that you're looking for and the key is like in a one key, like too high or too low. If you have access to the flex score, you can actually change the key and have the words that you want underneath it and have that set up as your PDF to show for your presentation. And you can have it set up for just melody only on the flex score, so you can put it in the bulletin or broadcast it or show it up on your screen. So that's what the flex score helps with.
Yeah, I mean, some of you who might be thinking about whether or not you put music in your bulletins that might be available online may have to sort of deal with the issue about how you actually physically get the music in there in the first place. There are obviously a number of music notation software packages available that either you or somebody within your team might be using to transcribe stuff. But there are these other facilities already available where you can kind of get them. Rather annoyingly, the Episcopal hymnal, well, I say annoyingly, I believe it actually comes with a CD-ROM, which actually has all the music on it for worship leaders to then drop into their bulletins. And it's unfortunate that there are a large number of parallels with Common Praise, but that doesn't seem to be a facility that was made available when Common Praise was made. I am not sufficiently familiar with both to know exactly how much overlap there is and whether or not obtaining that might actually be a useful resource for some churches. But I know a lot of, sorry, yes.
Speaking from experience, the issue with the overlap, some of the words are slightly different between the US hymnal and the Canadian hymnal. And also when the copyrights were done for the Common Praise hymnal, there was like only certain levels of stuff was requested for and not the full access that the American hymnal was able to do. So like that's flip side of Canada, US having resources to do that sort of thing.
Sure.
I think Gwenda has a hand up. Yes.
Something that I think, if I'm right, St. Matthias did this. People who, it works only in a comparatively smaller church, but that's a lot of our churches. People from the congregation who wanted it could have a Common Praise hymnal hand delivered to their home. And so a lot of people ended up with their hymnal at home, which made it a lot easier. So if you have fairly universal interest in doing that, that's a way to make it work.
Sure. I mean, yeah, if you're in a church where you're willing to give them out, and that's again, certainly another thing you could do. I don't actually know how much they cost. I mean, I don't imagine that I would advocate sending out copies to everybody for to have themselves, but yeah, there are lots of ways in which you can obviously do this.
One assumes they will bring them back gladly the moment they can be back in church.
Sure.
And speaking of that, a question I wanted to ask you, Jonathan, is the whole matter of how to integrate doing a Zoom service with being actually in the space church as well. So to have the two going simultaneously, which would be a big need.
Yes, I wouldn't say I'm sufficiently familiar still with the interface to know exactly how it might work, and I suspect some of it might depend on what aspirations you have. I mean, certainly a very straightforward option is if you want to live stream your service from the church into Zoom, is that one of your Zoom call-in users is your stream. And depending on what technology you have available, that might literally be a smartphone on a tripod, or you might be using something more sophisticated. I know that there has been talk in some places about whether or not you can actually kind of have an interactive setup where people on Zoom can kind of appear and be active in church as well. I don't personally know whether or not that is possible. I'm sure in theory anything is possible with the right technology, but again, I don't know what technology you'd need to make that possible. And similarly, how you would be sharing all the different bits and pieces with the different people. But yeah, I think that certainly finding ways to integrate what's going on online and in person would be useful. I suppose another slightly less integrated way might be that you have a live stream of your service coming into a Zoom interface, but that you kind of still have a leader within the Zoom session to make people feel that they're actually being attended to in that way. I mean, certainly one of the peculiarities now is that, of course, and this is something that we're discussing at the cathedral, is that actually people online might have a more rich worship experience than people in person at the moment, considering you can't sing and considering there are so many other things that you can't do. And a large number of our congregation currently want to stay online because of those things. And again, that doesn't mean that we should say, okay, we don't need in-person worship now or anymore, but that's where, again, what your congregation actually wants and values might be playing into some of this. And I don't think that we want to institute policies and practices that fragment communities that might not be very big anyway. But at the same time, you don't want a situation where your in-person and online services are kind of both being held hostage to one another's restrictions and or liberties. And so, but again, that might be where we don't only focus on Sunday worship as being the only way in which we do something in church. And this will obviously depend on the resources you've got available, the time you have available and everything else. But if an in-person service on a Sunday is less of a spectacle in that sense, that you might still then offer a service at another time of the week that has more of those things. Or as I say, there are many different ways in which you could look at that depending on what your context and setup is.
Thanks. I think Dion, you had your hand up. No. I'm just going to scroll and see if anybody else's hand goes up, or if anybody needs to just launch in if you do need to say something. So I'd like to ask a question to all of you, if since I have you here and we have a few minutes. So many of you, of course, are music leaders and worship leaders, and I'd love, since Jonathan shared one of his highlights, I'm sure there's been many, but either in the chat or aloud, if you could write maybe a highlight or share aloud a highlight for you in terms of your music ministry, your worship, your Zoom worship during these past 6 months. What has it been? There must be, we could probably take an hour just to go through those, but if anybody would love to share, I would love to hear. Yes.
For us, we mute everybody during our Zoom service so that the responses, we have one person that is unmuted to do the responses with me, but everybody else is muted except at the Lord's Prayer. And I ask everyone to unmute at the Lord's Prayer, and it's super chaotic It's so St. Thomas, but it's so touching. The first time we did that, and I heard all of these random voices coming in all together. I mean, I still get choked up when I think about it. And just because I know my community is out there, I know they're engaged during the Zoom service, but to actually hear them being engaged, it was really precious. It was really beautiful for me.
Thank you, Carla.
I mean, kind of on that point, there are some people who are treating the sort of chaos almost as an asset. People are actually writing pieces of music that are designed to sort of be that way. I mean, aleatoric music is nothing new anyway, but there are ways in which you can actually make a thing about this and make a feature of it, and yeah, sort of not rejoice in the chaos maybe, but actually make a point of saying this is why we're doing it this way, because we want it to be like that. We want it to be natural or organic or whatever it is. And so just because it's different, that doesn't always mean it's bad in that sense. And again, I'm sure actually if you were to go to a church and listen to people saying the Lord's Prayer, there would still be a degree of cacophony, even maybe not quite at Zoom level.
I'll share a highlight from the chat. It's from Colin. One of my congregants who's 88 went out and bought a new computer so she could participate in online worship. Her great grandson had to set it up for her, but she's now quite adept at it and is participating in a variety of things she never would have. Thanks, Colin.
I have one to share. At St. Matthias, where we had Scott Bradford, our organist, just playing from home on a keyboard that could do various things. For several weeks, when there was a really intense thing around Black Lives Matter, he switched it over and did just some really lovely sort of African-American inspired jazz stuff with the piano setting. And that was just really awesome.
Thank you, Gwen. Gail says, leading night prayers on Zoom for Christchurch Bell's Corner has been great in connecting with my new church friends of 2 years. Thank you, Gail.
Andrew O'Donnell had said up earlier, we use Zoom for coffee hour, Facebook Live for worship, even during in-person worship.
I'd like to just mention that one of the pluses for me has been that we've been joined by people from down in Montreal, about an hour away. We've had people participating from Ontario, even one person regularly from England, people that we maybe would see occasionally when they were able to come to Rawdon, but we've been seeing them regularly, and that's been a real positive.
That's wonderful. I wanted to apologize to Gail for not finishing her comment, which said also loving St. Michael's and All Angels broadcast every Sunday. Don't want to miss an opportunity to give a shout out to St. Michael's and All Angels. Yes. So there's been so many wonderful examples of digital ministry on Facebook. As we said at the beginning, this particular webinar is focused on Zoom and the challenges that Zoom presents, particularly for music. There's been a lot of struggles and triumphs. Any other highlights from any other worship leaders? We have regular participation from Winnipeg, says Jim Pratt, Toronto, Red Deer, Massachusetts, and the Bahamas. Yay. Yeah, that is definitely something that we've heard and we've experienced, is that people, as Jonathan already pointed out, geographical limitations and boundaries are no longer a concern for us. At All Saints Dorval, so blessed by 6 months of pre-recorded music on Zoom with Chris and Dion. Yay. Chris and Dion from All Saints Dorval. Great to shout them out. Thank you from David. Super duper. You know, we used Zoom for supper club, and the first time we got together, and I have it on right now. I have it on gallery view. And the first time I saw this, I thought, this is so great, because usually we sit at a long table and I can't see everybody's face. And I felt like there was such an intimacy to this platform that actually wasn't afforded in face-to-face, which is ironic, because people always say that you can't have intimacy or community on here, but the gallery view does allow us to really sort of see each other in a way that we can't across a long table, and hear each other too.
Could I just speak to that about hearing one another? It was mentioned earlier about having people muted during the service. We started off that way, and I found it felt a very isolated experience for me, because people could hear me, but I didn't get any feedback. We have started having people, if they wish, unmute themselves, and I do like getting those responses, and feeling that there's somebody else there.
Agreed. I'm glad Jonathan decided to open up this opportunity for us to do some sharing. I think that's definitely helpful. Roz says that we had a baby shower at St. Bruno. Andy set us up, is that right? So you did a Zoom baby shower. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Jessica's help. So Andy O'Donnell and Jessica set up a Zoom baby shower. Yeah, fantastic. My son doesn't. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Yes, I see Irene. Go ahead.
Yes, and we were able to watch the ordination of Geert Jan, and we wouldn't have been able to do that without the blessing of technology. So that was really great, and congratulations.
Yes, congratulations, Geert, on that, and also thanks to the music of Christchurch Cathedral. Jonathan was
that was wonderful.
This summer.
I must say, I was, of course, the candidate. You can say I was the victim, but my chapeau for the technical support. It's a little. There is a lot to. There's a lot of technical issues were involved in broadcasting my ordination, and I want to thank Robert Camara and Mark, the husband of Bishop Mary, very much. For me, it was nice because my family in the Netherlands could witness my ordination. So in this sense, you lose something, not in person, but you also win something.
Oh man, yeah, I was behind the scenes at your ordination, and I was impressed at how much went into it all. Those of you who just watched it, you had no idea how much behind the scenes work on the part of Robert and Mary and Mark Gibson. I think we're just about out of time, and I would like to take the last 2 minutes to make a few announcements. And also, I would like to take Carla's suggestion and close with the Lord's Prayer. So we'll do that all together with our microphones on. So we have to be a super chaotic mess here. It's my favorite to do anyway, just be chaotic. So, but let's just, let me make a few notes about what you can expect in the coming weeks. Okay, so first of all, thank you to Jonathan, and thank you to Madden, and thank you to all of you for joining. This has been really, really helpful. This is the first of three consecutive weeks of webinars on Zoom, on the platform Zoom, but of course under different headings. So next week we'll be talking about safety and tech concerns. We'll be talking about ethics. And we will have a panel of 4 presenters. So that will be great. You will need to re-register, however, for the sake of safety. This is not an active link that you not use it again next week. You'll need to just send me an email, and I'll do the same thing, and I'll send you details prior to the webinar in the morning. You can either do that on Facebook. There'll be a Facebook event this afternoon, which will be live for the week, and then or by email. So you could even, if you felt so inclined, since you're here right now, like just give me the email now. Yes, Leanne, I'm in for week 2, and I will get you that link. Yes, and there will be a 3rd week, and that's going to be on faith formation and community building. So we are going to, again, stay focused on the Zoom platform, but you'll need to re-register every week. Does that sound okay? Great. Gail says, thank you so much to Leanne and Jonathan for the wonderful opportunity. Thank you. Thank you all. So glad this was a wonderful launch to the webinar series. And unless anybody has anything else to say, Jonathan, are you okay?
Yeah, just to remind people that if you want to get in touch, then please do. My email address is on the Cathedral website. It's jonathan.white@montrealcathedral.ca, but it's there as well if you need it. And I know certainly a few of you did raise questions about being able to use the stuff that we've been producing. So please do let me know, and I'll let you know what we've got and how to get it to you. And similarly, if you need any more information about any of the other resources that we've shared, then just let me know as well.
Great, thank you. That's really, really helpful. And this webinar will be on our website this afternoon as well. And you can share this with any other worship or music leaders that you know that this may be helpful for. Madden, everything okay on your end?
Everything seems good.
So let us join together in saying the Lord's Prayer. Please unmute yourselves, because we want this to be loud and proud.
Just unmuted everyone so we can
Great.
go.
Our Father.
Our own are in
heaven,
highly
with thy
thy
name.
name,
Thy will be done on earth
I will be
will be
done.
done on earth.
as our
as it
daily
is
bread.
on
This day our daily bread.
Today our daily
Give us our
bread.
sins
our daily bread, and forgive us our
against
sins,
us,
The silver
in the time of trial.
against
not
Deliver
us
us from evil.
the
Power and the glory are yours, now and forever.
deliver us from evil.
For
For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory ever and ever. Amen.
Great. Thank you, Carla. See you all next week. Have a great Zoom service on Sunday. For those of you who will see Zoom.
Thanks, Leanne. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank
I know.
you. Thanks, Madden.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Yes, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.